sold the idea that financial independence is all about some number on your account statement, or even worse, that you don't qualify because of where you started out. That's just not true. It's not about some well-kept secret of the wealthy. It's about finding the right information and knowing how to apply it. On the Get Ready for the Future show, we're answering your questions so you can start making real financial change today. The journey to true financial independence begins right here, and it starts with you.
Hello, and thanks for tuning in for the Get Ready for the Future show. First of all, we hope you are all having a Merry Christmas. And as we round out the year, we are finishing up on the Get Ready for the Future show with looking back at your questions and the best questions of 2024. So we hope you'll enjoy part one today on this Christmas day.
And so this discussion goes into the question of what is a reasonable withdrawal rate from your IRA in retirement?
I mean, if you're making 12 in good mutual funds and the S&P is average 11.8, and if inflation for the last 80 years is average 4%, if you make 12 and you need to leave 4% in there for inflation raises, that leaves you 8. So I'm perfectly comfortable drawing 8. But if you want to be a little bit conservative, 7, but sure not 5 or 3.
Well, I was trying to back check it because, the 3 to 5, I thought that was a big range. And a lot of the studies I found showed.
Well, there's a lot of studies that are stupid in this space. So, it's just wrong. So listen, man, the math I just gave you is the math. If you're making 12% and inflation is 4, and you leave 4 in there, so your nest egg grows by 4. It's simple. 8 is what's left over.
Now, Scott, there is all kinds of things wrong with that comment that Dave made, and it wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was an emphatic, no, you can withdraw 8%. Now, let me say, if you were getting consistently every year 12% return on your investment, then Dave's math works. The problem is you're not getting 12% every year. I don't care who you are. You're just not. That's not how the equity markets work. And Dave is we're going to talk about this in just a second, but Dave is really all about investing 100% in equities regardless of how old you are. We'll talk about that in just a second. But let's talk about this 12% mutual fund thing. Occasionally, you will see a mutual fund perform at 12% or above. In 1 year, it could go to 20 or 30%.
Absolutely.
But the next year, it could be down 12%, and that's the problem.
Yeah, you look at just the last couple of years in the equity market, whether you measure it by the S&P 500 index or you take a look at some growth mutual funds, which Dave is a big proponent of, and you can see double-digit negatives in 2022. Right before that, in 2021, it was double-digit positives.
Right.
And likely in 2023, you saw some double-digit or at least high single-digit positives. But if you take a look at this concept of, and Dave promotes this a lot with the 12% mutual funds, the reality is over a long term, even 12% is a bit of a stretch. Let's take a look at this graphic we have for our viewing audience of the S&P 500 average annual returns, picking out several time frame. So this was 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years. You see on the screen that all ending at the end of 2022. Now, of course, as we already highlighted, 2022 was a very bad year for the stock market. But over the last 5 years, from 2018 to 2022, the S&P 500 index was up 7.5% on average annually. Over the last 10 years, you're looking pretty good, but you're still not touching 10.41%. Over the last 20 years, the index returned 7.64% on average annually. And over the last 30 years, if you stretch it out, going back to 1993, it's 7.52%. So you can see there, if you're going to, as Dave said, the math is the math. Well, that's the math. Now, you obviously could say, well, you're not, and you can't invest directly into the index. So a mutual fund is not the index, but you can bet many of the companies that make up that index are in those growth mutual funds.
It's a proxy for how the market is doing. And here is the harm, is that 12% mutual fund sounds great, but it sets unrealistic expectations. Scott, when we were participating in the endorsed local provider or SmartVestor Pro program, we would have people come in from that program and go, I want one of those 12% mutual funds.
Yeah.
And we would try to educate them about, no, but Dave says there's 12% mutual funds. And I love what Janet did with this one time. There was a guy that was just pounding the table. He wanted those 12% mutual funds and we weren't giving it to him. And Janet looked at him and said, let me ask you a question. If I had a unicorn, do you think I'd keep it in the back closet back here, or would I put it in the zoo and charge admission? Oh, you'd put it in the zoo and charge admission. Well, you know what? I don't have a unicorn and I don't have a 12% mutual fund because neither one of those things exist. And so it really is a misnomer that has gotten out into the public because of the generalization that has been made about this and the over-optimistic view of what equities will do for you. Will you occasionally have a period of time that a mutual fund or an investment in equities might do 12%? Yes, but your longer-term average is going to need to be moderated from that. And there's a great difference in the outcome that you get in a 12% return versus a 7 or 8% rate of return, which is, in our opinion, way more reasonable.
Yeah. My spouse and I, 50 and 48, earn $250,000 a year and have $4.75 million. We have 2 kids. I don't see us spending more than we currently do, about $125,000 a year, except when the kids go to college. When can I quit working? Well,
the ever eternal question.
50 and 48, we're still pretty young.
Yeah.
We've got a pretty nice nest egg, though.
Yes.
Congratulations to you, $4.75 million. The question again becomes, Janine, how are you going to produce the income you want to retire on?
Yeah, there is a lot there, Scott, that we have to kind of look at. First of all, Janine doesn't say exactly where this $4.75 million is, but we're going to assume that it's in a qualified account. If it's in a qualified account, then even if it is with a current employer, you cannot get to that money without a qualifying event, meaning that you quit or what have you, and you can actually draw without penalty at 55 from an employer plan. If it's in an IRA, it's 59.5. Why they did that, I don't have any idea, but that's what I hesitate to call it the wisdom of Congress or what have you, but that's how the laws came down. So in terms of when you can quit, it's when you can access that money is a big deal. Now, I think you also have to know, what kind of income do you want to retire on? Do you want to retire on the $125,000 a year that you're currently living on? If that's the case, then you do some simple math, figure out your Social Security. At $125,000 a year in income, that's a very small withdrawal rate from that $4.75 million. So I think it's very sustainable.
Yeah, about 2.6%. That's where the withdrawal rate is. So it is very sustainable. Now, that is a net number. We're assuming that you want to spend $125,000. So taxes would mean you'd likely need to withdraw more. And, to John's point, it depends on the types of accounts you have in terms of the taxation. And then inflation is a big key here too, because Janine, you're saying you want to live on about $125,000 because that's what you're living on now, especially if you're going to retire at 50 and 48 or anywhere close to that. You're going to have a long time frame of needing to raise that income. Your $125,000 is not going to buy the same amount that it does now in the future. So you have to have some growth component to your assets so that you're able to increase that income. And then the other question I would have here, because she does say they're only spending or living on about $125,000 a year, except when the kids go to college. How are you paying for college? Do you have outside assets in addition to the $4.75 million to pay for college, or are you cash flowing the college? Is the 4.75 going to be there, or is it going to be more when the kids are out of college? And that's part of the planning process too.
Yeah, I think that, theoretically we could say that maybe she needs to work until the kids are out of college if they're going to supplement their expenses, the college expenses, with her income.
Right.
I think that's the pivot factor there. Even if you retire at age 55, though, that is 7 years down the road. If you think about how compound interest works, that $4.75 million could be $6, $7, $8 million by the time you get to that magic age of 55. So that's a consideration as well. I think, Scott, you could also they could also stop if the spouse, if that spouse continues to work, because we don't know what the stream of income is coming from either of the spouses, but that is a possibility as well.
Yeah, she doesn't mention when can we retire. She says,
that's right. When can I retire?
That probably could happen sooner rather than later if your spouse is going to continue to work. But that's a big piece of this too. You know, we make light of that, but do you want to retire at the same time as your spouse, or are you just looking to get out of the workforce?
Well, and I think this brings up something that is really interesting here, is that, you know, if all of your money is in your qualified plan, that's great for retirement, but it boxes you in on everything else.
Yeah,
it really does, for the pre-tax penalties and things of that, the pre-retirement penalties and things of that nature. That's a real problem. The other thing that I think is really at play here is estate planning. I think that depending on where this money is, they could have potentially, and depending on how the election goes, they could potentially have an estate tax problem at some point in time in the future.
Yeah, that estate tax exclusion is very high right now. It's in the neighborhood of 28 million, isn't it? 13. It's 13 and a half, I think, per spouse here. So when we say estate tax exclusion, basically if your estate is under $28 million when you pass, you don't have to worry about paying estate taxes. But that is only in effect through the end of 2025. And if there's no change or no new legislation that changes it, that's going to significantly lower, and it could be even lower because it has been as low as $1 million in the past. I don't think it's ever going to go that low. But if you think about this 4.75 and having a pretty, I would say, low level of income at you don't think of 125,000 as low, but compared to the 4.75 million, it's not a lot that's going to be pulled out of that portfolio. So you could really be looking at in 10 or 15 years, they could have $7 million, $6 million, $5.5 million. And what is that estate tax looking like then? So some estate planning, some forward-looking estate planning is big there. And then I think about, to your point, if most of this is in a qualified plan, I think it would be difficult at ages 50 and 48 to accumulate that much money in a qualified plan because you can only get so much in it, but it could be close. If they have all of that in IRA money at the time of their death, that is a tax bomb that is about to explode on their kids.
Yeah, planning is, more money, more problems. You've got to have people come together and look at estate, look at tax, look at retirement income, look at college education. All of those things are just ripe for work with a financial advisor. I think that clearly is something that the more you have, the more things there are to say grace over. But that is not to say, if you're listening to this show and you don't have a lot of money, that is not to say that you don't need to work with a financial advisor. The issues are just more straightforward and less complex. So, but the help is still necessary. Scott, we were talking about the estate planning thing. I think it is very important to note that, there is a sunset of the Trump tax cuts that were passed in 2017 that happens at the end of 2025, and then it just reverts back. But I think that it is a consequential election depending upon who is in office at that particular point in time, how low that estate tax issue actually gets driven and many people think, I don't have an estate tax problem. Well, you might if you understand what all is included in your estate.
I think about what you said too about even if you don't have a lot of money, this is some things that you need to consider, the planning process. It's always a lot of money to you, right? And we think that way at GenWealth. Whether we work with people who have $4 million, we work with people who have $400,000, and still a retirement income plan is important, and estate planning is important in both cases. Last up, and we're going to have to hustle, Jeff from Stuttgart writes, my employer is going to offer a Roth option for our 401k at the beginning of the year. What do I need to know when trying to decide to my current pre-tax money, about $200,000, over to the Roth option? Well, first, Jeff, go in and thank your boss for offering this option. We can never have too many Roth dollars in retirement, and it's a great thing for you moving forward to be able to contribute to the Roth 401k. But let's hold the horses a little bit and talk about the pre-tax money, because we're talking about conversion of a lump sum of $200,000.
Yeah, you want to go slow on this, frankly, Jeff, because you're going to owe taxes on every dollar that you convert. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't convert any money, but it also doesn't mean that you should convert all of your money in 1 year. You'll want to do something that we call filling up the bracket. So let's say that your joint adjusted income, as an example, your taxable income is $100,000, and that puts you in the 22% marginal federal income tax bracket. But if you you actually have all the way to $190,000, actually $190,750 to be exact, before you begin to be taxed at the next highest tax bracket, which is 24%. So under this scenario, you can convert about $90,000 without incurring any more expensive taxation to you at the 24% bracket. You're still going to pay the 22%, but you're not going to pay that higher level. So you would be taxed on a federal basis at 22% on the $90,000 conversion. Your federal tax on that would be about $20,000 on that conversion, and you would need the money set aside outside the retirement program to be able to pay those taxes, because converting inside your 401k plan doesn't allow you to pull that money out to pay taxes. So you have to have the money on the sideline to make that happen. Otherwise, I think converting is a good idea. And Scott, you might want to take that incrementally.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing, having the cash on the sidelines to pay the taxes. People don't realize that when they start thinking about doing all of this inside of their 401k. You've got to be able to have some money, and it doesn't wreck your emergency fund, right, to pay the taxes. So that's another reason to kind of go at it at a slow pace. Now, it is important to mention that it does get folded into your overall tax return, right? So if you're used to getting a big refund,
yes,
it may not actually hurt you in the bottom line from your savings account perspective if you do that. So going slow, I think, is good, and a conversion, I think, makes the most sense for someone who has a long-term time horizon. So if you're in the 30s, your 40s, and this is obviously retirement money, I think it makes a lot of sense to begin to build up a tax-free income inside of a Roth. It is one of the most flexible retirement accounts out there, accounts in general out there investment-wise, and it is also the most underutilized. So if you're in your 30s or 40s, and even if this is not you, if you don't have a Roth option, but you do have an IRA, that same conversion can take place, but work with a financial advisor so you don't get dinged too hard on the taxes.
Scott, I'll also mention that you can contribute to a Roth 401k going forward, and the new legislation that is in play now allows an employer match to be deposited into your Roth account on an after-tax basis. Now, that's a change from our previous situation where the employer match, if you will, had to go into a pre-tax account. So you ended up with some money in a Roth account, and you have some money in a traditional 401k account that was your employer plan. But now both of those can go into the after-tax deposit account for the Roth, and therefore all of it would be tax-free to you when you retire.
And one final thought here, John, because people get this confused. If you do contribute to a Roth 401k, the dollars you put into that do not count against the maximum contribution limit on the Roth IRA. They are
correct.
Completely different, even if they have Roth in front of it. Your 401k, whether Roth or traditional, has a maximum contribution limit, and your IRA, whether Roth or traditional, has a maximum contribution limit. As we jump in, our first question is from Carl in Sherwood, and he writes, I hear you guys talk periodically about Dave Ramsey and his philosophies on money. Where do you agree and disagree with the things that Dave says on his radio show, and why? Well, let's start with the debt. John, we talked, you already mentioned that. A debt-free life is the best life. There is no question about that. And
right.
We work with our clients many times because our goal is for our clients to reach true financial independence. You can't truly be independent financially when you have debt hovering over your head.
Hey, I'm going to quote Dave because he quotes the Bible in this. He says, the borrower is a slave to the lender. And that is true. That is very true. And I don't care what the circumstances are. You are indebted to someone if you have a mortgage. You're indebted to someone if you have credit card debt. You're indebted. You have an obligation to pay that person before you pay anybody else. And so that is a big deal. And we agree that debt is bad for the most part. Now, you have to have some debt in most cases to have a home to live in. And so we understand that. But credit card debt, particularly revolving interest credit card debt, is a cancer on so many people in our society today. You know, Dave's optimistic view on wealth creation, we believe that almost everyone who has ever bet against the American economy has lost that bet, because we believe in the long-term nature of the growth of the American economy and investing in equity mutual funds. We think that is a true and right philosophy. Dave adheres to that too. And then Scott, his slow and steady method of building wealth, of basically just saving and investing and doing it. Yeah. He points out very accurately that one of the biggest factors in financial independence is just getting started to do the habit of savings. Yeah. And we would agree with that as well. So all that being said, that there's a lot of agreement in the things that we do and the things that Dave does. But just like I know you don't have any family members like this, but I got some family members that I disagree on religion and on politics, on you name it, on what channel to watch on TV and all of those things. Those things, those are family issues that you learn to take care of and live with and hopefully educate people in ways that come around to your way of thinking. Some of those things are minor, but some are really important. And in the financial world, some can be incredibly harmful to your journey for financial independence if you are led astray by some of the things that are said. We've got Renee from Fayetteville. She says, I am 56, husband is 62, and we have $3.2 million in retirement savings. Good job. Not to brag, but I feel like we're in a pretty good spot compared to most I've heard about. My question is, at this rate, would the 4% rule be an okay strategy for us? If not, what should we do? Renee, thank you very much for your question. If you're planning to retire now, you're going to have a pretty long retirement at their younger ages here. And I can say that because I'm older than both of them. But being 56 and 62, having $3.2 million is a really pretty cool thing. The question is, all right, first of all, how do you deal with this long-term retirement that I mentioned? You could live into your 90s. That is 3 decades. And so you have to think about that issue. You also have to think about the fact that you are in a situation of saying, I wondered about the 4% rule, but let's talk about how much income you actually need. Mm-hmm. I think that's the key thing that most people really do kind of gloss over when they're talking about retirement. They do all this math equations, but they don't do the simple math of looking at their required and desired income.
Yes, and if they're looking at just a percentage, it can be misleading too, because when you think about those assets, all of us would agree over $3 million is a ton of money. However, if they need $10,000 a month to make their household work, then you're talking about a totally different mathematical equation. I think if you focus on the outcome you need, which is the income, then you have a better way of figuring out if those assets are sufficient. Another thing I noticed here is that she is 6 years younger. So in that case, Renee, there's a even better chance that you're going to have a period of time where you are a single person in retirement. So the question is, what happens when one of those Social Security checks goes away or whatever other resources you have? So it's important to think of it not just as one item, but to really see it in the big picture of your overall financial picture.
I think that one of the things that may be escaping Renee is the fact that the 4% rule does not provide for any guaranteed income. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't know whether Renee and her husband have a pension or not. We don't know whether how they will sequence Social Security, but likely Social Security is the only guaranteed income that they would have in retirement. And if that is not sufficient to meet their basic needs, then they're going to need to dedicate some of that $3.2 million towards some sort of way to produce guaranteed income to them to be sure that they get through the next 30 years of life with their fixed expenses taken care of by regular, dependable, predictable income. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the first step.
Yes, it takes a lot of pressure off of your other assets if you can take care of that piece first. If you can prioritize guaranteed income to cover those things that you know are coming anyway. Think back to 2020. Your light bill didn't go down just because you were stuck at home and possibly unemployed. You've got to make sure those things are covered no matter what's happening in the market. The other piece of this that I think is really important when you're getting to that level of wealth is, have you completed an estate plan? Especially if taxes change, as they may do here soon, the estate tax could change drastically. So if that happens and you've now accumulated over that minimum, you could have a huge tax bomb for your heirs if you're not careful.
Teresa, I think also there are expenses that people don't normally associate necessarily with retirement, but after they really start to dig into it and think about it, they do find out that there are these things that they need to take care of. One of them is long-term care expenses. If one or both of you have a need for some type of medical care that is not covered by Medicare or your Medicare supplement, it could be that you need long-term care coverage to offset that. Now you say, well, I've got $3.2 million. I've got a lot of cushion. Well, it depends on how much long-term care expenses you might have. So that's one issue in particular. I think the other issue is, what major expenditures are they likely to do over the next couple of decades? Could they want to buy a car? Do they want to take, a lot of travel or something of that nature that may not be within the budget? Those expenditures can have a pretty big impact on the survivability of your overall retirement income plan. And I think that's where sitting down with a financial advisor and trying to do some forward thinking on this is probably appropriate.
Yes, I think looking at your current expenses is a great place to start, but you need to understand what might not be in your radar at the moment, which is something that we have special training in, is helping people identify those additional things. You think about that 4% rule. Let's pretend you only had $1 million. I know, only, right? That's the goal a lot of people have. But let's say you had $1 million and we're in 2008. You're going to be in a situation where either you have to take a pretty substantial pay cut or you have to take an unreasonable amount out. So doing the math for you, in 2008, at one point, the market was down 40%. So you were taking $40,000 a year in income if you were taking the 4% rule as your way of doing this. But now that your portfolio is worth $600,000, you're either going to take $24,000 a year, a $16,000 discount, and cut and pay, or if you continue to take that 40, you've now taken over 7%, which is not sustainable. That's why having a strategy that is built to provide for your guaranteed income needs without worrying about the market is so impactful, in my opinion.
At GenWealth, it's called a flooring and bucketing strategy, or the ready to retire process. Basically, we provide for a significant level of guaranteed income to meet your basic living expenses. And then we do bucketing, or a time segmented strategy where we are laying out different dollars for different time segments in your retirement. If you take a look at the graphic, if you're watching the video portion of the Get Ready for the Future show, a couple of those buckets fall in the time frame of 1 to 10 years. That's where the most conservative money is. You're going to need that money fairly soon, so you don't need the vagaries of the market, the ups and downs of the market, to impact how much money you would have available. So we make those investments in very conservative investments. In the middle of the array of buckets, there is a moderate bucket where we are producing income in that bucket, but we're also giving some low-end growth to your portfolio as well. And then in the last couple of buckets are the growth buckets. Those are out 15 plus years. To tell you the truth, Teresa, the 15-year thing is almost magic, in that if you take a look at the history of the market, there's never been a 15-year period of time connected with the S&P 500 where you've had a negative return. Meaning that if you just leave it alone, it's likely to have a positive return for you. The odds are all stacked in your favor if you do that. And that's why we segregate those equities to those long-term buckets.
And it was very helpful in 2020. Of course, I was not an advisor in 2008, so I didn't have to live through that trauma. But in 2020, when the market dipped so heavily in such a short period of time, the few clients that I did get calls from, I was able to reassure them, listen, your conservative bucket is okay. That's the one we're drawing from right now. We've got time for those others. But pretend you're in 2008 and you've got those later buckets. Well, there's the market since then. It's been right at 15 years. We're way ahead of where we were. You've had time to recover. Now, we can't guarantee market performance, of course. Our job is to mitigate it as best we can. And that's where this flooring and bucketing strategy can really be magical.
Well, we are out of time for part 1 of our best questions of 2024. We hope you'll join us again next week on New Year's Day for part 2. And once again, from all of us here at GenWealth Financial Advisors, Merry Christmas.
The GenWealth Financial Team is available to you 24/7 at info@getreadyforthefuture.com or call our offices at 866-653-PLAN. That's 866-653-7526. You should personally consult a financial advisor before making any investment, and no strategy can assure success. Securities offered through LPL Financial. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advice offered through Independent Advisor Alliance. Independent Advisor Alliance and GenWealth Financial Advisors are separate entities from LPL Financial.